What's the scariest story? You know that is 100% true. Story 1. I stumbled across a cult. This was 2 or 3 years ago. My family at the time loved taking cruises in our city, and especially the beach. When we would attend the beach, we would cruise for hours until it would be dark. This once time we were a little late than usual, and it was getting dark, so we decided to head back home on the main street. The way this beach is set up is where you can drive on the beach or on the road. The road was higher than the beach, though, if that makes sense. Basically, from the road, you can see the beach at the bottom. Anywho, this beach is not necessarily isolated, but it is not packed because there are better and more popular beaches where I live. So, of course, since it is nighttime, the beach is empty with a few people like fishermen, but that was it. A good 10 minutes down the road go by, and I noticed something on the beach. I am on the passenger side, and the beach was on my side, so I had a good view. But I saw a light, but not like a normal bonfire or flashlight. They were sticks planted on the beach on fire in a specific order. Of course, I was interested seeing what they were doing. As we got closer, however, the people on the beach were very odd. They appeared to be wearing gowns of some kind, but I could not tell for sure. But once I saw a good view what they were doing, I saw the symbol built by the sticks on fire and them holding their arms up also in a certain position. My family and I were shocked, and despite being far away from them, it was still frightening to just see that. My father immediately stepped on the gas pedal to get away from them as far as possible. To this day, I still do not know what kind of cult they are, and I regret not calling 911 to let them investigate them. I also think to myself, what if we were driving on the beach instead of the road? We would have definitely bumped into them, and who knows what would have happened. Ever since then, my family and I never gone to that beach again and just go to the more popular ones within our city. Story 2. My scariest experience. Doubt anyone will take the time to read, but whatever, going to share it anyway. It started off with a night like no other. Every Saturday, we had our cousins and aunts and uncles from my mom's side come over, back when they still were together and not divorced. We were at my grandma's house, which is a little small house located on our property. We have an acre of land. My grandma had Jeopardy on in the living room. This was also back when half my cousins did not move to Florida. Anyways, it is around 12:30. My mom and aunts were very tipsy, and my dads and uncles were sleeping. My aunts end up driving home with my uncles all sleeping in their cars. Anyways, gets to the point where it is just me, my brothers, my parents, and my grandma. My brothers and parents went back to our house, and I was 11 at the time, and my body was so filled with sugar, I passed out at my grandma's house. I wake up on the couch with a pillow and blanket around 1:20 in the morning. At least that is what I thought the clock said. I hear a thump from the attic, a loud and very big thump. 11-year-old me thought no biggie. We had a mice problem at the time. Just a few mice. I will go back to sleep. Around this time, I could easily make up the time. About 2:40, I see the attic door open and something come out of it. I scream, run to my grandma, and wake her up. When I try to show her what I saw, nothing was there but an open attic door and an open door. We called the police. They said if there was an intruder, he just ran out the door in fear of being caught. I tried to tell my friends and get them to listen to my grandma about the story, but my grandma rarely wants to talk about it. Anyway, that is my story. Too long did not read. A person snuck into my grandma's house and left before I could tell my grandma. Edit, forgot to mention, when we went up to the attic, we saw old dishes, a picture of my grandma and grandpa a while back with my grandpa's head cut out of it, some of my grandma's clothes, tons of cigarette cartons, old milk cartons filled with urine, and a bucket filled with waste. The police did not take his fingerprints since he technically did not do anything to my grandma, but that person was some sort of sick creep. Story 3. This time last year, I got a phone call from my dad around 9:30 at night. He was inconsolable from the moment I picked up, and after a few minutes, I was able to calm him down and find out what was going on that was causing him such distress. He told me he had seen my grandmother in the living room, which does not sound strange at all unless you know some context. My grandmother had passed away in early 2010 in that living room while she was home on hospice care. But my father insisted that he had seen her there as if she was one of us, and she said, "I will see you soon." So at this point, and for the months leading up to it, He had been consistently pretty sick. He could not stay out of the bathroom for more than 10 minutes or so, and it seriously disrupted his daily life. I had already been urging him to see a doctor, and when I went to visit him that night after our phone call, I pleaded him to go once again, fully knowing he would not due to his huge fear of needles. Flash forward to May of this year, and he is diagnosed with colon cancer, having only found out because of a hernia that was causing him so much pain, he felt like he would pass if he did not go to the emergency room. And just this September, he passed away after declining very quickly. It is almost like he was healthy, even though he was not up until he had the surgery that found his cancer. He fought a good fight, especially at the very end when he was convinced he had to escape because we were holding him against his will, trying to poison or get rid of him. It was really sad and real life scary when he started yelling at us like we were scary strangers. It is really scary how fast and how hard life will hit you, and you never really know when it could be. What is terrifying is what can happen to our bodies over time, whether detected or not, and just how easy life can change within a moment. What is not scary is the doctors. Do not be afraid to go. Story 4. Back in 1987, one of my childhood friends was taken by a person who was responsible for harming and ending the lives of 6 girls. My friend was 15 years old at the time of her passing. The strange thing is what happened 1 year prior. She and my best friend were dating and came to my house one evening and told me they had called the police to report a made-up story. She had stayed out too late the night before, and her mother was upset. She was scared to tell her mother she was with my friend all night, so they both came up with a lie. They both told the mother they found someone in the desert close to where we lived. The mother called the police and reported the story. Well, the police show up and took my friends to the desert to find this person. It was late and already dark. My friend remembers a few times they came close to some rattlesnakes, and it scared him so badly. They spent close to an hour searching, but obviously found nothing. The police made a report, and it ended there. I can only assume they figured my friends were making it up, but they did not get into any trouble. Then 1 year later, my female friend goes missing and is found in a shallow place in a different part of the desert months later. More victims start appearing in the same area. The person responsible is caught and eventually convicted of 6 counts of ending lives and sentenced to death. He is still currently awaiting execution here in Texas. When we found out our friend was a victim and found in the desert, it just frightened me because of the story they both told me 1 year earlier. Story 5. When my brother and I were children, I was about 8, he was about 6. My parents had gotten a divorce and my dad moved in a house 2 blocks away from my mom's in Southeast Portland, Oregon. The house was owned by Aunt Kim, but she had not been occupied by her for years. So when my father heard she had one available for rent that was so close by to my mom's, he jumped at the chance to rent it out because of how close it was to my mom's house. Come to find out, the reason it sat empty for all those years was, and to my knowledge, is because it has a poltergeist residing inside it. When he moved in, it started out with small things. A shadow moving across a wall that was clearly a shadow of someone without anyone being there. Lights flickering. It being completely light throughout my house except for this one hallway that was always unnaturally dark. My dad, being a non-believer, refused to believe anything that went on in the house, even if it was something he saw with his own eyes. That is, until it got to the point where even he could not deny what was happening. It really started to get bad when we had lived there a couple months in. Things started moving in front of my brother and I. I would see a shadow person out the corner of my eye. At night, I would brush my teeth when I was doing, so I would always look in the medicine cabinet, so when I would go to spit my toothpaste out, I would bend down to spit it in the sink, and when I would bend back upwards, there would be a shadow behind me. I would whirl myself around to find nothing there. Every time, the scariest thing would be when whatever it was would wake us up. It would be at the bottom of my brother's and my bunk bed. I could not ever see any detailed features like a face or eyes or anything, but I could just tell it was some kind of man that was not nice. We left after maybe 6 months of living there, have not been back since then. To my knowledge, there has not been anyone living there since. Story 6. One time last summer, my friends and I went out in the sticks in Malala, Oregon to go shooting. Whenever we go, we tend to go early because it gets kind of worrying around midday to dusk or night. This particular time, I had brought my custom AR-15 Mossberg 590 Shockwave and my 1911 with my friends and we were having fun shooting some AR-500 steel targets I had brought with us. It had gotten to around 4:30 to 5 o'clock in the evening when we began cleaning and packing my gear up, when this person I assume was a man pushed some brush aside and stepped through some thick brush about 50 feet or so away from all three of us. Now, this would normally be fine because I have run into folks doing shooting or riding dirt bikes on some far-out trails in the past out there, but this encounter was different. The reason being was this person was covered head to toe in a plastic suit and had a pistol on his hip, almost like a containment suit with the mask and everything. He looked at us and we looked at him. I grabbed my AR and handed my friend my pistol and made it a point to let him know we were armed. One of the sketchiest situations I have been in a long time. My thought process was he was either burying something out there or was making substances and came to investigate the sounds of gunshots. You know when you can look into the eyes of someone and tell there is something off with them, or you get this feeling that makes the hair on the back of your neck raise up? It was one of those moments. We hurried out of there, and I make more of an effort to go to my local shooting range instead from now on. Moral of the story, go to a shooting range instead of the woods. I kind of consider myself lucky that nothing happened to us. Story 7. It is more disturbing and heartbreaking, as well as tragically ironic rather than scary. It is also really scary, of course, fingers crossed, that this guy has gotten a hold of his anger problems. But I will share it. A 15-year-old boy in the United States hurt a 14-year-old girl who was a school friend, and then set the scene on fire because she teased him about the shape of his ear and nose, and called him a fake, or told him something rude. It is not really clear whether they were friends or a couple from what I read. He confessed that something had been building in him for a while because he knew he was not the person he wanted to portray himself as, and that other people had called him a fake in the year leading to the act. This boy was a teenage political activist who volunteered for a governor's election campaign and was quoted at the age of 13 as claiming to be very conservative and as wanting to put an end to benefits for offenders. Of course, he was also perennial class president or vice president, and also appeared on local television to talk about politics. In the year leading to the act, he had been removed from his television job and had been experimenting with substances to look cool and fit in, as well as boasting that he would become president of the United States or governor, or that he could commit the perfect crime alongside other tall tales. In short, a story of how academic and other achievements and being popular can mask serious emotional problems. The poor girl's body was found in a terrible state near a grocery store, and you could imagine how traumatizing it was for the people living in that town, and especially for the victim's family, with the girl's older sister being so traumatized that she took to sleeping with her parents. To add to the tragedy, the girl's father passed away a few years later. The boy was later released on bail and retracted his confession by blaming a friend, and by earlier claiming that the victim had passed from a substance issue and that he had set the scene on fire so that her parents would not find out, which left the girl's injuries unaccounted for, obviously. The boy also said to an inmate that the governor would pardon him if he got convicted and sentenced to a life sentence without parole. Predictably, he was convicted and sentenced to mandatory life without parole at 17 after rejecting an offer to plead guilty to a reduced charge of manslaughter in the pretrial stage. While I do not think the criminal court system of any country has anything to do with justice, I cannot deny that after this horrific act and his refusal to take responsibility, I felt some satisfaction at him being sentenced, even though juvenile life without parole in the United States has always tugged at my heartstrings. Also, almost every one of his classmates thought he deserved to spend the rest of his life in prison, with one suggesting that a life sentence was not enough, and this was a very satisfying downfall for someone who was touted a few years before the act, to be someone the residents of his state were going to hear about a lot in the future. Anyway, this teenage offender's luck is extraordinary, and he was sentenced to life with parole and paroled due to Supreme Court rulings, and now he is ironically known for getting many other serious offenders out of prison, with no one picking up the irony of his post-parole career choices. This story is absolutely true, by the way. I know it sounds crazy. Strangely enough, not everyone in the victim's family opposed his parole. I cannot imagine how devastating and painful it must be for the victim's family. By the way, this guy claimed at 13 that he opposed affirmative action for minorities and has recently spoken about privilege while talking to students of his alma mater. Story 8. When I was at my friend's house when I was 10, and there was a kid in the neighborhood that we totally avoided because he was an utter racist. Keep in mind that my friend was black and I am white, so whenever he saw me with him, he would make a comment about him being less than me. Now that I think back, I think he wanted to be friends with me, but that does not make what he said right. But to continue with the story, my friend and I were playing Halo 3 in his basement on a Friday night, and his basement had a small window on the left side above the ping pong table and was not lit very well. So I was cracking a cold one with my boy, root beer, and we hear a tap on the window. We thought it was a squirrel or something, and we turned the volume up and continued playing. When I heard breathing, I almost lost it. This was not normal breathing. This was your 2-mile sprint, panting, breathing, and we looked back to see the kid pushing the window in with his hand, him grunting furiously. He looked like he wanted to harm me and my friends, so we ran upstairs and told his dad, who immediately ran outside to see if he was still there, and us tailing him. We find him with a BB gun and a mask colored completely black. We shouted at him to get away from the window, and he ran off. What was he thinking? Story 9. This is not that scary, but it is just unsettling. So when I was a sophomore in high school, I was at my house, and I lived in a suburban neighborhood, so it was not a main road, but it had branches that led to different neighborhoods. I lived on the corner. So right on the road, and I heard a collision, and it was scary. And since this was the middle of the night, I did not go to investigate. Come the next day of school, I found out that 3 seniors at my school passed that night. Every year, my principal would have class meeting and would say, look around, any one of you could pass, because 2 other people passed that year, so 5 total. And a little less scary, but in the same house maybe a year earlier, in the middle of the day, I heard a crash, and I looked out the window, and this teenager who had been riding his bike got struck by a car. He lived in my neighborhood, and the dad came out leaving a young child at home unattended, and he was so drunk I could smell it from feet away. I went outside to ask if I could do anything to help, like offering water. The police had already been called. The kid was okay though, but it was just frightening. Keep in mind this literally happened probably 1/15 of a mile from the other crash. I am tempted to go measure the distance to find the exact length. I lived 5 minutes away from that house until I was 12. And the few years I lived there were the only times I have experienced something like that. Story 10. When I was around 7, my family went on a family vacation to Hawaii. My parents were talking to some locals who told them about an old irrigation canal that they go inner tubing through. It was supposedly where they filmed Jurassic Park, and my parents thought it would be a free, fun, non-touristy excursion. Without telling anyone where we were going, we bought inner tubes from the dollar store and drove down miles of gravel roads until we thought we found the place. On either side of the road were old irrigation tunnels that switched between covered underground tunnels and open-top above-ground tunnels. My dad sent a tube through the first tunnel, and when it popped out the other side, we thought it was safe enough, so we all jumped in. We went through the first tunnel, no problem, but when it opened up, the current was too strong to climb out, so we were forced to keep going through the second. This one was a lot longer and pitch black, and we could not see the end of it. Everything seemed fine until we started feeling our heads scratch against the ceiling as it gradually got lower and lower, and the tunnel became more and more narrow. My mom's inner tube was the first to pop, and both my sisters and mine followed as we were dragged along in heavy current through pitch blackness, trying not to get caught on roots underneath us. It got so narrow to the point where I had flipped on my back and I could feel the rock ceiling scraping my nose. This went on for a solid 1.5 to 2 minutes, but in the pitch black water, it was unbearably long. Finally, I heard my dad scream he could see the end, and we all made it out. But the silence in that tunnel as we all tried not to panic and just hoping we would see the end, and not all drown together, was really scary. Safe to say, I do not do caves well anymore. Story 11. 4 months ago, we moved to Virginia, and my husband started getting extremely feeble, and his muscles were wasting. He even passed out one night from pain that he kept saying was coming from his neck. We took him to the hospital. They said something about some pressure on a nerve, and we went to the doctor who ordered an MRI. The same exact thing. As soon as the doctor saw his MRI, he was immediately rushed to get surgery performed. He had broken his neck in 3 places a long time ago, and somehow had healed, and his spinal cord was being crushed and was literally hanging on by a thread at that point. Of course, we are older and just thought he was arthritic, but it was far worse than we imagined. He had the surgery and is still healing from it now. At the point he was at, he was about a month away from being in a wheelchair and did not even know it. I got to give it to him. He must be one tough old goat, because the doctor was just blown away when he saw his MRI and what he had to work on when he did the surgery. His neck had been broken and of course healed badly, causing all kinds of scarring and damage. All I have to say is God was with him and he is fine today. But he and I both scratch our head all the time and wonder, how does somebody break their neck and not know it? Of course, he knew he had hurt himself, but when it initially happened, he went to the hospital and they just sent him home without x-raying him, and that was over 2 years ago. I just remember he laid in a bed for a long time, and we could not figure out what was wrong with him. Story 12. A cousin of mine settled with her husband in Australia and bought a house there. The house was quite big with 3 bedrooms and 1 big living room. The husband works late night shifts most of the time. First night in the house, she was reading a book alone on the sofa in the living room and falls asleep around 1 in the morning, and suddenly she fell from it. She ignores that, thinking she could have rolled from the edge of the sofa. She then gets up and lied on the sofa. Just seconds later, she closes her eyes. She felt something lifting her from the sofa and dropping her on the floor. She immediately got up from the floor and went to the puja room, separate room for god idols and worship, Hindu. She applied holy ash over her forehead and tried to sleep in her bedroom. While sleeping flat on the tummy, she felt something pressing her back. Feeling petrified from that, she started reciting Kanda Shashti Kavasam, holy chants for Hindu god Muruga. It stops. She immediately left the house and sat on the porch. When the husband came, he calmed her and took her to a hotel for that overnight stay. She never went back until the neighbors helped them get a priest to cleanse the house with holy water. The husband's job was on the line and a miscarriage. Everything was going sour when they were staying there. They sold the house and moved into an apartment or flat nearby their workplace. When I heard it from them, it was unbelievable. No one could explain this incident. As a firm non-believer of ghosts or anything of that sort, I could not ignore this happening. If good is present, so is evil. Thinking about this scares me and makes me think, is there something? Story 13. Maybe a little scary, but pretty cool too. My grandma did not tell us this story until she was terminally ill with ovarian cancer. One of my uncles, Ted, was born with spina bifida. For those that do not know what that is, it is a birth defect affecting the spinal cord, which can be very debilitating and requires extensive medical care. While much better care exists today in regard to the condition, back then, 60s, getting the necessary treatment was not readily available. My family is from southwest Wisconsin, which is a pretty isolated area, not a lot of hospitals nearby. Therefore, anytime Ted needed medical treatment, they had to drive all the way to Madison to get Ted the care he needed, which was about a 2-hour drive one way. My grandma loved the hell out of Ted and was committed to making sure he got the care he needed, so she volunteered to take him to Madison anytime he needed it. Despite having 5 other kids to take care of, a saint she was. Anyway, my grandma and Uncle Ted had been returning from one of these trips, and it was a real foggy night. The road to and from Madison is a single-lane highway with no exit ramps, just side streets with no turn lanes that sort of come out of nowhere. Straining to see the road, my grandma's driving along with Ted in the front seat and suddenly hears stop. She slams on the brakes, coming to a dead stop in the middle of the road. Not even a second later, a semi-truck traveling on one of the side roads that had blown a stop sign due to the foggy conditions crossed over the highway at full speed right in front of them. Had she not stopped, they would have been hit broad, side by the semi. I highly doubt they would have survived had they been hit, but that is not the point of the story. Once their blood pressure returned to normal and they had processed what had just happened, sitting in the middle of the road, my grandma turned to Ted and said something along the lines of, "Thank God you said something, Ted. We could have been killed." To which Ted gave her a confused look and replied, I did not say anything. Story 14. So I actually have two stories. The first is a story from my hometown, suburbs of Vienna. Sometime at the beginning of the 20th century, a few sources say 1908 or 1910, there was a group of 20-something-year-old friends in said suburbs. One night a fight broke out within the group during which one of the men passed and another man, Tony, was sentenced to life in prison. He spent about 20 years there until on his deathbed, one of the men that had been in the fight confessed to being the actual person responsible. Tony was released, but he was not able to get a job or friends. He had to live in a cave in the forest above Modling, now called Grammel Tonal Höhle, which roughly translates to Pork Rinds Tony Cave. During the summer, he spent his time up there, and during the winter, some families let him sleep in their barn cellars or attics and gave him, you guessed it, pork rinds to eat. He passed up there in that cave. I just think it is horrible to have your life be turned like that. People said that he was very nice, but he never was given a second chance at life, even though he was innocent. The second story is a more recent one. There was a couple living in the suburbs of Vienna. My family knew them, and they had 3 children. The father was Austrian, the mother was from Barbados. In 2011, they decided to vacation there and live with the mother's family. All went well until one evening there was a knock on the door. The mother's dad opened the door only to be struck multiple times right after, all in front of the whole family. The father wanted to help the mother's dad as he fell to the ground and was struck as well. The children had to watch the whole thing. The mother's dad passed on the spot. The father passed on the way to the hospital. Later, it was revealed that the people responsible had knocked on the wrong door. They wanted to harm the owners of the house next door. Story 15. My grandfather on my mom's side was a medic in Vietnam. He always rode in on those Hueys and typically helped wounded soldiers onto helicopters. He passed away last year after my grandmother, but the last time I saw him alive, he told me this. Hey, me, come here, I want to talk to you. What is up, Granddad? I say, he says, look, I am going to tell you something. I do not want you to tell your grandmother or your mother. I say, okay. He says, I know you are thinking about joining the Marines, and I want to tell you never go anywhere near soldiers who have radios. I said, Marines do not really use the cumbersome radios that he had to use. He says, just do not stand too close to your commanding officer or anyone important. He stopped looking at me, looked down, and I only got a glimpse of his eyes, but his pupils were totally dilated, like he was focusing on something, but there was only the rug. He pauses. From this point on, it is only my grandfather talking, and says, when I was in Vietnam, I was used to what I saw because I was a medic. But this one experience scarred me more so than the others. My helicopter was called in one day, and we were very unprepared because of how fast we were called in. This one platoon, about 50 or 60 guys, was caught in a bad ambush, and the landing zone was not far from the fighting. He saw the radio man along with the lieutenant in the middle of the fighting. The radio man turned to look at the helicopter with this look that says, yeah, the cavalry is here. The radio man's smile was a precious smile that only a child could make on Christmas. A half second later, the radio man, the lieutenant, and 4 surrounding soldiers were engulfed in fire. My grandfather sprang up and ran to the soldiers. The radio man was on the ground, stomach down, his skin red, uniform torn, radio fused to him. The radio man looked at my grandfather and said, just like the woods remember Tony at the creek, we would skip stones. My grandfather's name is not Tony. The radio man then looked my grandfather in the eyes and said, right, Ma, and passed on the helicopter ride back. He was 16 and had a loving family, a girl back home, and a college set up for him. This is terrifying to me because such potential, such a chance in life ended by the throw of a grenade. There was no brave last stand, no sacrifice, just instant loss. Something that was once the greatest something is now the most nothing of nothing. Story 16. It happened to me when I was 14 years old. I was playing with my then best friend, and there was a room full of big rice bags, and there was no fan or windows where I could breathe. It was a small dark room, which was only used to store rice. My friend, who was of my age, accidentally locked me in it, and he could not open it. He tried many times but failed. I started to cry and said, "Tell my mom I am trapped inside." He said she will scold him, and he ran away. I started to sweat because it was a very hot summer day, around 40 degrees centigrade. I started to scream and hope that someone might hear me, but no one was there at 3 in the afternoon under the hot sun. I was in for 10 minutes, and the only way I could breathe was a very, very small hole in the door, which was so small that I could not even see properly from it. I thought I was going to pass, and I did not want to pass because of suffocation. I was crying and praying and trying everything to make some noise, in hope that someone would hear me. I tried last time and yelled really loud to please, for God's sake, save me. My neighbor, who was out of the city from 2 weeks, heard me. Only God knows how he came there. He rushed towards my home and called my mother, and just when she opened the door, I was full of sweat and I collapsed on the floor. Later, when I gained consciousness, I was in a hospital, and the doctor said it was only a matter of 5 minutes, otherwise I would have been gone. Story 17. This happened this year and no one believes it. So it was a normal Tuesday at school, and I remember it because it was pizza day. Where I sat, you could see a fire exit door, and it was next to a window because it was a glass door, and you can see a car loop for easily dropping and picking up kids. It was a few minutes before lunch was over, and a gray SUV pulled up, and no one got out for a minute. I could see a man tapping his wheel nervously. I assumed his kid or something got in trouble and was nervous. Now I look back, this is a silly reason. He gets out and walks around to the back seat so his back was facing me. The only reason I was paying attention was because my friends were talking about a mobile game I did not care for. But he pulled out what I swear were 2 pistols. At this point, I was watching where the office leads to the cafeteria and see one of my 2 gym teachers walk to the office while my other comes over too. The second one to go over is head of school security, so put 2 and 2 together and you can see why I was nervous. So lunch ends, I head to gym, as it was my class after, and the first gym teacher was there, but not the head of security. He was gone until 10 minutes after class started, and when he got back, he whispered something in the other gym teacher's ear. So I am pretty sure I saw a potential threat at school. Story 18. So about 7 years ago, when I was being babysat by my grandmother, who watched me when my mother was working or searching for work. So one day we decided to go out for a drive up to my great-grandfather's old house that my grandmother used to live in before my great-grandfather passed away. We went up since he had previously passed away. What was a bit sad is they lived at the end of the road and the houses had small yards between each house. The neighbor tried to buy that house, and we refused, so when we moved out, he decided to do what every reasonable adult would do and burnt it down. So on our way up to the property, since we still owned it, we came in front of the neighbor's house and slowly went over the hump. The road was all gravel. We drive a 2012 Ford Focus that is absolutely stock and really close to the ground. So we got caught on it and could not move at all, but tried to get out of there since we knew the neighbor was unstable. So we go out and try to get the car out of place since my 7-year-old mind thought I could do it. And while we did, the neighbor came out absolutely screaming at us to get off his property. Now my grandmother is not like others and got mad pretty fast, and they got in a little bit of a screaming match. One threat that scared the life out of us was that he would push our car off the hill with his 2007 Dodge Ram 2500, and that is what made me start crying. As my grandfather's trying to comfort me, this man did the unthinkable. He went behind the door for a moment and came back out, except this time with a shotgun. He cocked it and shot it off into the air as a way to scare us, which he succeeded in doing. So my grandmother got in the car and just slammed the pedal as she reversed as my grandfather pushed the front of the car. We eventually got out and quickly got out of there. I was scared he would actually harm one of us if we did not get off of the property. Story 19, it was 1997 to 1998. I was in middle school. Starting school that year, there was a girl in my class I had been aware of, but never really knew. She was quiet and kept to herself. She was one that found a way to not make her presence really known. So like often can happen in the weird social structure of early teenage years, some classmates were mean to this girl. She did not really have friends, so she was an easy target for someone trying to feel better about themselves. It has always made me extremely uncomfortable when the innocent are treated poorly. And I am naturally a kind person. I started talking with this girl. She never became a close friend, but we would pass notes and even occasionally talk on the phone. We never hung out outside of school. 1, we were not really that close. 2, come to find during our conversations, her parents did not let her outside of the house except for school and church. I never met her parents, but it was clear they were very devout religious folks. She never went into detail, but would mention how she was not allowed to wear certain clothes, wear any makeup, or attend social functions. I thought it was a bit off, and I felt bad for her. Simply chalked it up to her religion and conservative parents. I once offered to drop off schoolwork at her home after she missed a couple days. She said in almost a panicky way, "No, I am not allowed to have people over that my parents do not know." I passed her house usually a few times a week as they lived off one of the main roads in our city. I noticed it always looked almost vacant. No one ever outside puttering around. The garage was never open. No cars in the driveway. No warm light glow through their dark windows in the evenings. It was almost summer, and we did not have much of the school year left. One morning we walked into our classroom and our normal bubbly smiling teacher looked solemn and serious. Next to her stood the school counselor. They informed us this girl had passed away. Not going into any detail, they alluded to self-harm. The class reacted with disbelief and blank stares. Self-harm was uncommon at that time, especially in my city. Details started circling around the community. She had hung herself, and the note focused on her parents' treatment of her and lack of friends. The counselors talked to us individually for support, and I did share the odd comments she had said during our phone conversations. Scary and sad for me in the sense of what really happened behind the closed doors of that dark, lifeless house. Once I had my own car in high school, I started taking a quick detour to avoid that house. When I would see the house, I could only imagine her hanging. And what if I would have shared those odd comments to my counselor earlier? Story 20. I shattered a kid's skull because he tried to harm me. He was severely mentally ill, had severe schizophrenia, was a diagnosed psychopath, and lots of other things. He broke into my room at some family's house in Salt Lake City, Utah. He had a toy sword, but in a dark room, a plastic imitation sword looks pretty real. I woke up to a sharp pain on my head and laughter, and saw the kid with the sword. I punched him in the gut. I was on the left side of the bed, and he was standing about 6 to 8 inches from the side, and got out of bed lightning quick. I threw him on the floor of the kitchen, which was linoleum, and when his head landed, I heard a crunch, and he was screaming and holding his head. Everyone in the house was now looking at me standing above a screaming 11-year-old on the floor, and the police were there in about 5 minutes. Impressive, since the house I was at is on the far outskirts of the city, and I spent 14 hours in a new and air-conditioned police car. With the door open, the police were not heartless, and they only let me go when the kid regained enough energy to start screaming about harming me and my parents. They found out that he had sent bomb threats to several local places under different names. He admitted to all of them not out of shame, but because he thought he was right. They let me out because he told them the story of trying to stab me in my sleep. Well, his parents have always been overprotective and overbearing, so they do not have any weapons in the house. Not even kitchen knives. They see knives and weapons in general as temptation from Satan, so they do not have them. I am surprised that they even let him have a toy sword, but it was found out that he stole it. He is okay, I guess, and most of his direct family cut contact with me for hurting a child. Story 21. When I was a kid, my bedroom was next to a little shed attached to our house, and I could access the shed through a set of glass doors. We lived in a super rural road. We had neighbors, but they were decently far away from us. When I was around 12 or 13, so around 2002 or 2003, I started hearing footsteps and seeing a figure walking around outside my door and trying to pull it open in the little shed. I was obviously freaked out and would wake up my parents. It went on for months, and my dad was over it. They never believed me and would check, but no one was ever there. He actually slapped me in the face, saying I was dramatic. About 6 months after it started, I had stopped waking up my parents. I had moved my bed in front of the doors so they could not be opened and found a piece of scrap rebar next to my bed just in case. It was still happening 3 or 4 times a week, but I was honestly beginning to think I was crazy. Then one day my dad picked me up from school early. He said we had to go home to talk to the police. I thought I was being arrested for being dramatic. Remember, I am barely sleeping because of it, so I was kind of confused. We get home, there are multiple police cars, and I freak out. My mom calms me down and explains. My dad had gone into the shed to get some tools and found out heaps of them had been stolen. Chainsaws, electric drills, all missing. He contacted the police but did not think much of it and mentioned it to our neighbors, so they did not get robbed too. One of the neighbors then tells him his son may have stolen them to sell for substance money, but asks not to tell the police. They will just pay him back. My dad does not take it and calls the police. The police go to the neighbor's house and search his room. Among the stolen stuff and substance stuff, they found photos of me on our property, some school photos he had stolen, and photos of me in my bedroom. It was him going into the shed, and he had tried multiple times to open the door. As soon as he realized I was awake, I would turn on the light or a torch. He would run away, which was why my parents never saw him, and they think he started stealing stuff because he was already there. He was not in there to steal stuff. It was an afterthought. My parents were incredibly angry, of course, but they felt awful for not believing me. I am too scared to think about what would have happened if I was not a super light sleeper. They still feel bad, but I kind of just give them grief about it. I do not know what happened to the guy. I never went to court as they videoed me recounting everything, and I never want to know. But I hope he got help before he did anything that he cannot take back. On a positive note, after all this, my parents finally caved and let me get some pet mice. I had an awesome mouse named Paprika, Pappy for short, for 6 years, who helped me realize that I wanted to work with animals. Story 22. I come from a small town in Ireland that does not see much crime. Our neighboring town was even smaller than the one I came from. And this is where this story takes place. Other people may have different details, etc., but this is the version I know. One morning back in 2014, a man decided to take a hatchet and end the lives of his parents, who were both in their 70s. Both retired. The husband was a math teacher and the wife was a nurse. My father had worked with the wife on multiple occasions, and he said they were such a lovely couple. The son believed that ending their lives would send them to heaven. He left the house, locked the doors, and went to his brother's engineering company and handed his wallet to an employee saying, "I will not be needing that," and fled. Different versions say builders found the bodies, and some say the other son went to visit his parents, unaware of what had occurred inside, and upon knocking on the door there was no answer. He knew they were home but could not get inside. He went to the kitchen window and noticed it was open and climbed in, not prepared for what he was about to find. Apparently he had harmed them to the point of partial decapitation, the room covered in blood and multiple wounds covering both their bodies. He was eventually tracked down a while after and arrested. He was found not guilty of murder by reason of insanity and diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. During the trial, they said he believed his mother was trying to poison him, that people were conspiring against him, that aliens were going to take him to the Matrix, and that the IRA was trying to recruit him. The night before the killing, he believed he heard his mother asking him to end her and her husband. He is now committed in the Central Mental Hospital in Dublin. Story 23. When I was a little girl, we used to live in this 2-story house. I always told my parents that the house was super haunted, but they never believed me. The house itself was very creepy. We had street lights on our street, but the lights never shined on our house. At nighttime, it was always pitch black. The sink in the kitchen would always make that creepy dripping sound, even after getting it fixed numerous times. My room was at the top of the stairs, and some nights I could hear footsteps coming up and down the stairs, and even sounds like the footsteps were coming towards my bed. One instance was, I was about 8 or 9, I was really sick, so I stayed home with my mom, and we would watch TV in our upstairs living room. My mom had asked me to go turn off the AC downstairs. As I walked down the stairs, there was a stoop where I could overlook the railing and see the living room, kitchen, and my parents' room. For some reason at that moment, walking downstairs, I wanted to overlook the railing. I saw that my parents' bedroom door was slightly cracked. When I looked at the door, it opened all the way. Mind you, it was just me and my mom in the house at the time. I got scared, screamed, and ran back upstairs with my mom. When I told her what happened, she pretty much dismissed it and said I was seeing things. Another time was late at night. My dad worked early in the mornings, so he would leave the house around 3 in the morning. He never came upstairs, but I could always hear when he left the house because our alarm would make a beeping sound. One night after I heard he left, I went back to sleep. A few minutes later, I felt a cold, wet kiss on my face. The next morning, I asked my mom if she had come upstairs to give me a kiss that night. She said no. I waited until my dad came home from work to ask if he kissed me before he went to work. He also said no. So who kissed me at night? The last crazy, most terrifying thing was, one night it was a stormy night. I was probably 5 at the time. When lightning struck, the whole house would light up. I had a nightlight at the time, and I took my nightlight into my older sister's room down the hall, plugged up the nightlight, got into her bed, and my face was facing the door, which my older sis left open. I could not see anything beyond the door because it was pitch black. I put the covers over my head but left a little breathing hole to breathe and to see out the hole. I closed my eyes. A few moments later, I heard a loud clash of thunder that woke me up. As soon as I opened my eyes, I saw a white pale face with a piercing blue eye looking straight at me through the hole I left for me to breathe and see the room. I just froze. I could not scream for some reason, and we had a stare down for about 30 seconds. Then I saw the white, pale, transparent body get up and leave the room into the pitch black hallway. I stayed up the whole night terrified. I never told my parents. Years later, when I was in high school, we moved out of that house. I decided to do some research on that house. Come to find out, an elderly woman passed in that house, in the room I slept in. I showed my parents the story of the elderly woman that passed in that house, and now they believe me, and I was not crazy. Story 24. A lot of people do not believe this, but time and time again it speaks so loudly that the message cannot be ignored. What you do with your life and time is your choice and yours only. But if you decide to interfere or disrupt someone else's fate to bring goodwill of giving back to the cycle and current to your fellow man, you effectively denied others from having a happier and meaningful life. Something positive that they could have passed down to the future generation, and that possesses significance of determining many things through the course of time. There were people in need and could have been supported by certain people at certain times, but when that is purposefully halted, the balance shifts, sometimes violently. Powerful as the tsunami or the earthquakes, something that was meant to be distributed in a planned quality and quantity now must rapidly shift to unexpected tides from interference with the cycle. Now, certain people will make certain choices, not cross paths with who they were supposed to cross paths with, and the what was supposed to come out of all of that will be nevermore, and that just does not go away without effect. Here is the terrifying part. Once it starts, nothing can stop it, because what was supposed to be just does not vanish. It just takes into another form. That process is what is unexpected and unyielding, blind to all foresight. If you are unruly enough to disregard and disrespect this cycle, then surely you will, what some might say, reap what you sow, or some other similar sayings that have appeared in our times. Similar sayings have been made to words many times, and the very reason why that is the case is because the message could not be ignored and had to be conveyed. If one is so inclined, they may gain something from such phrases, but to this another thing has been constant, and in all likelihood will continue to ring true, which is history tends to repeat itself, and when one asks why, they may be looking straight at a fictional mirror. It is out of my control now, and perhaps the message may no longer be ignored. I was supposed to, but it was interfered with certain intentions. Everything is connected. Otherwise, you would not have read this. But what do I know? Story 25, I met a murderer and his victim right before he was killed. I was waiting to use the bathroom, only one there, at a local coffee shop with my friend. A gentleman was waiting on his friend who was in the bathroom and was asking to see our license because he did not believe we were not 21. He seemed a little tipsy. We thought he was just hitting on us and we said no. But he kept trying and even showed us his. His name stuck in my head because he was putting out such a weird vibe. The bathroom door finally opens and I see a man who is barely able to stand. Instead of leaving the bathroom, he turns back to the sink. I am about to pee myself, but guessing I could easily escape based on his state, and my friend was right outside, as was the main counter of the shop, I figured I would just pee and keep an eye on him. So I walk in and he goes to the sink and starts trying to wash his hands. I have to wipe off the seat. It had pinkish pee sprinkled all over it. I hover peed and watched him the whole time. Other than giving me a goofy, wobbly smile, he did not make any moves. I finish up and head out. My friend tells me that the license guy was getting pushy about seeing her license and asking where I lived. So we made our way back to our larger group. We found out soon after that once they left the coffee shop, the drunk bathroom guy was murdered by the license guy, who he had just met. We may have been the last people to see him alive, and it occurred to us later that license guy may have been looking at us as possible victims. He told the police he had an irresistible impulse to end someone's life. Messed me up for a bit. I should have helped that guy, made sure he got home okay. It still eats at me because as bad as my memory is, I remember what both of them looked like. Killer's name was Ray E. Rice, and it was in 1994 in Anchorage, Alaska. Story 26. I live in a rural area. There were 3 young guys, 19 or 20, who lived in the area. 2 were first cousins. The 3 of them were out drinking in the town nearby. The 2 cousins decided to go home earlier than the 3rd guy. They were all staying at another friend's house. For some reason, whether it was a phone call from the 3rd guy or what, the 2 decided they would drive to the closest point of town where it was still fairly rural and there would not be police since they had been drinking and pick him up. The guy in the passenger seat uploaded a Snapchat story of them on their way down. They had music blaring in the car, no seat belts, and the driver was drinking a bottle of beer and smoking a cigarette while driving. The drive down to pick up the 3rd guy was about 10 minutes from the house they were at. They picked him up and started making their way back home. The driver was speeding, and that combined with the alcohol, he ended up losing control and driving straight on into a concrete wall. The guy in the passenger seat passed away on impact, going through the windscreen. The driver, I believe, was resuscitated at the scene, and the guy in the back seat was breathing but not conscious. The parents of both were told there was no hope for either of their sons. The driver was found to be brain dead, and the guy in the back seat, they said his brain bleed was so severe they could not assess the damage, but with an injury that bad he would most likely pass away, or if he did survive, be totally disabled. I went to the hospital when both guys were still on life support. Since the one that passed away and the one that was brain dead were cousins, all 3 families of the 3 guys were there in the ICU. It was a devastating sight. One family who had lost their child and was waiting for their nephew or cousin to be taken off life support. Another who had lost their nephew and was waiting to take their child off life support. And another who were waiting to see if their son was brain dead and also going to pass away or was going to be totally disabled. His head was swollen. There was blood coming out his ears and nose. Everyone was told to say goodbye. The driver was taken off life support and passed away. 2 first cousins gone. The guy in the back seat miraculously has made a full recovery. He badly broke his leg, as they believed he was sitting in the back between the 2 seats, but his leg got caught in the seat when he was thrown forward, saving him from going through the windscreen. The families of the 2 cousins were sympathetic for the guy in the back seat until he started to make a recovery. Their grief for their lost son or nephews turned them bitter and cold, and even though it was their son or nephew who was speeding and drinking, they blame him for bringing them back into town to give him a ride home. They have made sure that he knows they think he ended his friends' lives. So although he recovered, he now has to deal with that. If they had been wearing seat belts, they probably all would have walked out with minor injuries. These kinds of stories happen all the time. You hear them on the news and think, wow, that is sad, and continue on with your day. But it does not really affect you until you experience it firsthand. And you also realize how much all the gossip and media coverage surrounding the incident really affects the families. Story 27. One summer morning, about 26 years ago, before cell phones were commonplace, as I was leaving for work when the telephone rang, I picked it up and a young polite man asked to speak to my 14-year-old daughter. Call me overprotective, but I asked him how old he was because his voice seemed a bit older than the boys in her group of friends. The man responded politely saying he was 21. With that, I told him my 14-year-old daughter was not in the habit of receiving calls from 21-year-old men, and if he called again, I would contact the police. I asked him in my best firm, do not annoy me mom voice if he understood, and he said yes, and I slammed down the receiver. I went to work and told a colleague about the call. She laughed and we went about our day. A few weeks passed. I was leaving for work and picked up the newspaper from the front step and saw the cover. They had found the remains of a young girl in a heavily wooded rural area. They identified her as Tina Franks. I recalled my daughter had two casual friends in our old neighborhood named Tina. I went to her bedroom, and as any mother of a teen will tell you, waking 14-year-olds up during summer vacation is nearly impossible. So I left the paper on the nightstand. I was in my office when she called me on the phone. She was crying and told me it was her friend Tina. I quickly left work to go home to comfort her. It appears the RCMP discovered Tina's remains after they found a young man bound and bleeding near the Trans-Canada Highway. He described being in the woods drinking with a man and two young teenage girls. Apparently, the young man was hit over the head with a bat and tied up. He regained consciousness and found his way to the highway. RCMP searched the area and 7 hours later found the man in a van with two girls who he had assaulted and beaten, and recorded the assault. They searched the area for evidence and found Tina's remains. A few days later, my daughter received a telephone call from police. They wanted to ask her questions about the last time she saw Tina. According to my daughter, she saw Tina at a downtown bus stop towards the end of the school year. Tina tried to convince her to go to a party with her, but my daughter was meeting me at my office. We had plans to go to dinner and a movie. The police wanted my daughter to describe what Tina was wearing. From what we understand, my daughter was the last person to see her before she met her killer. The police found my daughter because Tina's killer had her address book and our phone number was underlined. I am convinced I spoke to the man who ended my daughter's friend's life. I know I saved my daughter's life by being a rude, overbearing mom. My beautiful girl is now married with two beautiful girls of her own. She is affectionately called Mama Bear by her beautiful girls because she has a tendency to be a bit overbearing and protective. Story 28, I had a C-section for my second child as I had preeclampsia, and that boy needed to get out of me. Everything was going great. My doctor's an amazing woman, and we were all chatting about random stuff while she was putting me back together. I could only feel my chest to my head, nothing down below, so no pain or anything. I realized that as we were talking, I was feeling extremely tired, like I do not think I have ever been so tired in my life, and all I wanted to do was go to sleep. No desire to even see my baby. It got very quiet and I felt like my body was floating off the table, but my mind was in absolute bliss. I did not care about a thing in the world. I do not even have a word to describe the feeling, but just everything was okay. It was not happiness, but like a relief from all stress, a huge amount of being content and relaxed, and I have never felt such a good feeling. I felt like I was 3 feet above the table. I could not hear anyone talking. I did not even notice what anyone was doing. I do not know if I turned my head, but I was looking from above at the guy monitoring my vitals, and he was writing something in his notebook. Looked at the monitor, and all I heard was, "Oh no," and he rushed with an injection into my IV, and like a gunshot in my head noise, I was jolted back down onto the table and wide awake, and so much noise. Now I felt my body, and it was just this insane body chills. I could not stop shaking. I was so out of it after that, and I do not remember the night. The next day, the nurse comes in and asks me if the transfusion people have been by yet, and I was like, no. So she leaves and comes back with my doctor, and she apologizes to me and says that when they were putting me back together, I had bled out, and they were struggling to contain it, but managed in the end, and I had lost over half my blood volume. The day after that, the nurses were like, "Oh, you look so much better today. We were surprised you were even able to walk the first day," and laughed. I am thinking what is so funny that no one told me I was dying, and I did not even get a transfusion until many, many hours later. But the scary part for me is that I know the feeling now when we pass, and it was peaceful, such a happiness and content, and I know that nothing in my living will ever come close to feeling that. I am serious when I say there is no word to describe it. I struggle now with feeling a purpose, and it does not help that I have had major health problems since then, including cancer and a loss of my reproductive system. Both of my parents are gone, and I am only in my early 30s, and feeling happy at any time, and I do not think I will until I truly pass the next time. I believe a lot of the stories from the people who say they passed and came back. I did not see lights or anything, but I did experience the body lifting. But nothing will ever make me feel like I still belong in the world, and it is scary to keep going.